Is there financial aid available for law school? And if so, how on earth do you get it? My name is Cindy Montgomery, and I'm the CEO of Montgomery Admissions Consulting, where I specialize in working with first generation and minority law school applicants. And today we are talking about financial aid. How do you get financial aid for law school? Because honestly, law school is not cheap. It's really, really not. And if you aren't in the position where you think you're going to be getting that full ride scholarship because of your LSAT and your GPA, you might be wondering how you're really going to pay for this. That is what I want to start to break down in a series of videos for you. We are going to be talking about financial aid because it is so important that you understand that law school is not just a time investment, but it's a financial investment. And I want you to come out of law school in a better financial place than you went into law school with. We are going to law school to break generational cycles of poverty and debt, not to create cycles of poverty and debts. So I am going to be walking you through how you can get financial aid for law school, what the terms mean, how you can maximize this opportunity and make it work for you in a way that is good for you, good for your family, good for your legacy. So let's just dive in. The first thing that I want to talk to you about are factors that affect your ability and eligibility for need-based aid. And then I'm going to be talking to you about how to apply for need-based aid and what you need. And then I'm going to break down the different kind of loans that you can get. Now, we all hope that we're getting scholarship money and grant money, but I want to break down the different kinds of loans that you can get so that you understand what your options are. But first, let's talk about, are you even eligible for need-based aid and what do you have to do to qualify? So the first thing that you should do is you should fill out the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, FAFSA. You've probably seen this. You probably remember it from college, or you remember somebody talking about it about someone else's college. The FAFSA is your first stop. Now, FAFSA opens up October 1 every year. So just like you want to get your applications in September, October, November, you want to get your FAFSA in September, October, November, because the earlier you apply, the better it is. Not that the money necessarily runs out, but you just want to make sure that you are applying early to get your best shot at getting as much financial aid as possible. Now, what are those factors that will impact your ability to get financial aid or need-based aid to qualify for it? Well, your personal resources for one. And it's not just your income or your W-2s, but it's also your retirement, any assets that you have, or any other investments. Those are all things that sometimes factor in to whether or not you get aid. Now, the FAFSA doesn't ask quite as many questions as the institutions might later on down the line about some of those assets and investments and retirements and that sort of thing. The FAFSA has actually been quite simplified, but you do want to keep in mind that institutions are still going to review the FAFSA in top of sometimes their own financial aid applications. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just go by the FAFSA, but they are still going to make their own determinations. Talking about how they are going to make their own determinations, school policies and resources really are a large driver for how much need-based aid you can get from a law school institution. Law school, it's harder to get need-based aid than it is for college because there's just this assumption that you're older, you're a working professional, and honestly, they like to save most of their dollars for merit aid to get those top students with those high LSAT scores and GPAs or other qualifying attributes. So a lot of schools put more of their money into merit aid than they do need-based aid, except for the schools at the top. So if you look at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, these schools only give need-based aid. They do not give merit aid because they want to make sure that all of their dollars go to making the school more affordable for those who cannot afford it, regardless of, those high LSAT or GPA numbers. They're really committed to making sure that they're able to serve students from working class backgrounds. I know that I really benefited from that. I was on max financial aid at Harvard, and it was so important to me and my family and so important to my ability to afford law school that Harvard was the most affordable school that I got into. I tried really hard not to make a decision just based on prestige. I really wanted to make sure it was a good fit. I wanted to make sure that it was a good community. But I can tell you that the money was good. And yes, I got merit aid offers from other schools, but in terms of need based offers, Harvard hands down gave me the most need based aid. And it was in a grant, so I didn't have to pay it back. So, the other thing that affects your ability to get financial aid is your dependent status. Now, a lot of times you're going to be independent in terms of the FAFSA, right? It's just your income. But for a lot of schools and their own institutional policies, they may still ask for your parents' income and information, especially if you're under 27, you're unmarried, or you don't have any kids. So, what do? How do you actually apply? Well, first you get all your papers together. You're going to want a copy of your taxes. And then you are going to want to fill out the free application for federal student aid. You are going to create an FSA ID and get that process started. You will likely need your driver's license, your social security number, records of current assets, and records of any untaxed income like child support or alimony or any of those sorts of things. Then you are going to complete any additional financial aid forms from the school themselves. For some law schools, actually, that financial aid application is going to open after you get admitted, because I think that it just probably makes more sense to only read financial aid applications from students you've admitted instead of the whole world. But for some schools, it's going to be before, so you want to check, and that's kind of a school-dependent thing. And then, you want to wait and receive your offer. Now, need-based aid is not negotiable like people think about negotiating merit scholarships, but you can appeal or you can have conversation. But it's not necessarily, well, this school gave me more need-based aid, so can you give me more need-based aid? It's really just like, hey, can you look at your calculations, because maybe that school saw something that maybe you missed. It's not really the same thing where you're just kind of trying to get more money off of need-based aid. Now, I told you that the last thing that we would cover is loans. There are a few different types of loans for law school. There are federal direct unsubsidized loans, grad plus loans, and private loans. Now, in undergrad, you may have qualified for direct subsidized loans, direct unsubsidized loans, or a combination of both. And maybe you're looking at me like, I have no idea what you're saying. What does this mean? Subsidized loans do not accrue interest until after you have graduated. So if you take out $20,000, when you graduate, it's $20,000, and then the interest starts. Why is that? Because the Department of Education actually pays the interest while you're in school. Law school students, unfortunately, are not eligible for subsidized direct loans. You would have to have a federal unsubsidized loan. Now, with a federal direct unsubsidized loan, you can borrow up to $20,500 roughly a year, and interest does start accruing as soon as you start school, but you do have a 6-month grace period before you have to start paying it. Now, there's also grad plus loans, which, depending on your circumstances, might be worse than federal direct unsubsidized loans, or, better. They're sometimes easier to get, but also they're sometimes harder to get. It really depends on who you are. Now, in order to get a grad plus loan, you do have to have good credit. So if you don't have great credit, this is not really the great option for you. Sometimes the interest loans for plus loans are actually higher than they would be for federal direct unsubsidized loans. And plus loans do have an origination fee, a fee for kind of setting up the loan that federal direct unsubsidized loans don't necessarily have. But they are very common, these federal grad plus loans. They're a very common way to finance your education if you need to get a loan. On top of all of this, there's also private loans and sometimes loans from the school itself. Now, it really depends on your situation and your credit for this, because the interest fees could be lower with a private loan, but they could be way higher depending on your credit, whether you have a co-signer. You could end up really spending a lot more money with private loans than a federally backed loan. And, when you have certain programs like we've seen where the federal government is canceling students' debt, hopefully I'm speaking it into existence. But, we've been having these conversations. Those things don't apply to private loans. So if you only have private loans and the federal government's like, hey, $50,000 off of every federal loan, it's just not going to help you, which would be really sad. But I'm not saying that's a reason to not get private loans. It's just something to think about, that sometimes there are some federally backed programs that would help in the future as we kind of continue to have conversations in this country about student loan debt. Those things usually are only going to apply to federal loans, loans that are backed and sponsored through the Department of Education. Now, it's really important that in this entire conversation, you don't forget about loan repayment assistance programs. I have another video on that. We'll be doing more conversations on that. That is such an important piece to this puzzle because not all aid for law schools is given on the front end. Sometimes it's given on the back end. What that means is that if you know what kind of career you want to go into, or you know what kind of income bracket you might get, you might be eligible for a loan repayment assistance program. There's different kinds. Some don't really say you have to do public interest. It's more about what category, like if it's a legal job, a nonprofit, a government, and an income. And some programs will cut you a check, like Harvard's did. I was in Harvard's loan repayment assistant program called LIP, and they cut me a check twice a year for my loans, and it was fantastic. That is different from a loan forgiveness program in which you pay your loans for a certain amount of time with no help, and then it is forgiven. Some LWAP programs, as they're called, you have to stay in a certain type of job for a certain number of years. Some are very flexible, opt in, opt out. Harvard's is super flexible. So there's a lot to look into. We'll go deeper into that into another video. But you can't just say, okay, well, this is the price that I'm going to pay at the front end, because you never know. Your institution might end up footing the bill for all of your loans. So there's a lot to consider. I know it's a big decision. I know it's a big piece of the puzzle that sometimes gets overlooked when we talk about law school admissions. We focus on the LSAT exam, and honestly, a lot of people just stop there. But then some people focus on the personal statement and the diversity statement. And, that's my specialty is essay editing. But it's so important that we talk about the whole picture, and that we do talk about financial aid and how much you can afford and what it's going to cost you and your family, and what the long-term implications of that are, and what kinds of ways you're going to finance it, whether it's through grant, through outside scholarship, through fellowship, through loans, and what kinds of loans. So I'm here if you have financial aid questions. I want to make sure that you are making the best decision for you and for your future. As always, if you like this video, make sure you share it with a friend, like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments below, where are you in your application journey, and what are you thinking about in terms of financial aid? What are your financial aid questions that I can answer for you on this channel? I'm so excited for your law school journey, and I can't wait to see you guys next time.